a lot of doulas don't stay in their lane.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say a lot, I mean of all the doulas I've met 2 who do.
Mm-hmm.
And like my doula, how you were talking about doulas who are like, a lot of doulas, when they see adverse outcomes, aren't even going, they're gatekeeping. They're trying to steal the narrative of the people who have experienced the trauma and turn it into, this is why you shouldn't deliver at this location. This is why you shouldn't deliver with this provider, et cetera, et cetera. I know my doula left the hospital immediately after my son died and went and helped my midwives lie to another mother who they had to transfer to the hospital 1 hour after I did, and help them like cover up the lie that they were telling to that mother about why she had to go to a different hospital than the one that I had been sent to. So unfortunately, the training for being a doula for Donna has Ina May Gaskin. Like, I want to send out some hounds into the woods of Tennessee to see what's buried in the ground there, because there's got to be some shit to be found at the farm. So anything that requires people to be reading like Ina May Gaskin books about childbirth, those people are not coming out of their training unbiased. They are not coming out of their training with the intention of healthy, safe deliveries. They have a goal of natural, unmedicated deliveries. And if the goal isn't happy mom, healthy baby, then you're muddying the water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you know what I was going to ask you guys about, if you guys know what their training is, that Donna or whatever the heck it is, their international doula thing. I looked it up of what it actually, because I was curious. I was like, I don't know what they do or what they don't do. And you don't even have to be certified to be a doula. But if you look it up, yes, there's like 4 books. And one of them, I found out from Marissa, who's not on here, but she knows a lot about doulas too. The lady that created the title doula was actually the head case therapist, but like a physical therapist. And she come up with this thing for birthing people, I guess you could say, and started a marketing business toward it, and started like, she's literally one of the books is from her, because it's actually her name that started the doula thing. And then the other ones is, it's Ina May and it's all this natural whatever crap. But I'm like, and I get it, like, first off, they can't do medical stuff because they're not going to be a nurse. They're not going to be, you know what I mean? They're not going to be taking vitals. They're not going to be doing any of that because they can't. But at the same time, if you're just teaching them like the whole mentality of vaginal birth, at whatever the cost is, but vaginal birth is just the way that it is. It's like, what are we teaching our doulas that are going to be for out of hospital and in hospital, and it's finding them is really hard. And one of the things is they're trying to get, it was passed here in my state to have doulas get covered under Medicaid, Medicare kind of thing. And so now we're going to have the state pays for them, but it's a catch-22. As much as it's good to have exactly what you're talking about for somebody that's maybe underprivileged, or maybe they don't have the money, they can't afford it, or they're not supported, or they've gone through trauma. Like, there's so many different reasons of why you need support. And I do understand getting it paid for, because it's not like they're free, like, you know what I mean, which they probably should be, but because that's what they are, they're just support, but you do have to pay them. The only thing is that we have too many doulas that are telling people, new parents or new, like, they don't know that to go against medical advice. A doctor wants to do extra testing. They're saying you don't need the extra testing. A doctor wants to do a C-section. You don't need a C-section. there's where the line has, there was a line of what you are as a doula. Like, you really don't know anything. You're just supposed to be support. But once you've crossed that line, you're not a doula anymore. You're not anymore. And guess what? You're not a midwife either. So, I mean, midwives shouldn't be given that stuff either, because technically they don't have the medical advice either. So I think this is a huge problem that we have. And I've talked to doctors and other people around my state, and I was like, why don't we, it doesn't have to be Nevada, it could be anywhere, it could be any state. You guys could do it in New York. Why don't we have doulas that do a doula program that has to do with in certain hospitals? So they hire them and they're paid through the hospital, like a hospital staff member. You know what I mean? They could be part-time. They don't have to be full-time or whatever, but this should be something where they work alongside with doctors, and you know what I mean? And part of their thing should be, I know it sounds kind of weird, paperwork, but really that's what it is, to help you fill out your paperwork. Or if something happens, to do reporting. It should be more like they're an admin, a supporting admin of your role of what's going on in life, And I think that would probably kind of bridge our gap that's going on, because we have so many that are so far out here and you can't tell the difference. But if we had ones that were already, like, the doctors know who they are, the hospital knows who they are. By the way, they can get fired because that's another thing. You cannot report a doula. You can't. You can, but it doesn't go anywhere. Nobody does anything because they're not medical. They're not licensed. They're not anything. They don't even have to be certified. So if we had them in the hospitals where they're somehow doing something, I don't know, birthing classes, or I don't know what it would be, because I'm not in the hospital of that level. But if they just had them where they would be like, here's a certain OB where they have 2 doulas that works in their office. You know what I mean? And
Right.
they go at your appointments with you. So you're getting getting measured, getting all these things checked out. They're here hanging out with you, not only with the nurses, but your doctor, but you have a doula that says, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And like we've said before about mental health, they could be right alongside of you, sitting next to you and saying, how are you feeling? How are you sleeping? What's going on with you? Do you need anything? And I think that right there's our mental health would be whatever, because we'd have somebody that we would be trusting, that's, this is whatever. So I kind of think we could probably use this to something way, way more than they ever have been in the past, but something way better. But unfortunately, like, it would have to start from a hospital. It'd have to start from doctors. It'd have to, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, what's been happening over the years, even it's gotten worse with COVID, is that doctors are getting a really, really, really bad taste in their mouth because of doulas telling them to go against what the doctor's recommendations, suggestions, the things that's like, this is how I'm going to try to keep you safe. And then here's this doula. And there is doctors where they've said people don't show up. They'll stop going to doctor's appointments. The day that they're supposed to get induced or come in for an NST, they don't show up. And then they find out weeks later when here's their nurses like, hey, where are you? Are you okay? Whatever. They find out they had a home birth because their doula suggested a home birth. And that to me blows my mind. And that's our problem. You know what I mean? That's a big problem, is you shouldn't be going against the medical stuff that's going on. We have medical flaws, but at the same time, if a doctor's suggesting these kind of things, there's probably a reason. And your doula of no training doesn't know what that reason is and probably doesn't understand it. So don't assume. You know what I mean? Like,
I just, side note, I just texted my doula and said, remind me who you certified through for doula, and why you picked them instead of Dona. And she said pro doula because Dona is a bunch of granola heads. That was her answer.
Yes, I love that.
Mhm.
I think, am I the only person outside of the actual providers who worked in a hospital?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you work in a hospital, you spend enough time in a hospital, you understand how hospitals work, you understand how doctors work, you understand all that stuff. So when I went to the hospital, it was, I can't call it a second home because it wasn't, but it wasn't quite so surreal. Because you're a hospital, you're a patient, you're in a room, there's all these people, they come in, they check on you, they leave. They say things to you, they leave. They do things, they leave. And you're like, you're not having necessarily a relationship. You aren't necessarily really aware of everything that's going on. You're just kind of like a bit player on the stage. You're not part of the main story arc or whatever. So you don't really understand, and nobody, and it's not like you sit there, you think between contractions that, wow, this is a nice time for me to talk to a nurse and ask her some questions, because I'm sure half of the questions you had 20 minutes ago left a long time ago. So what I think a doula would be really, really useful for is to be aware of the ebb and flow of the things, and to say, okay, you are here, you're laboring, you're progressing, you're not progressing, you seem uncomfortable. Do you want to do anything? Or if, do you want to ask the nurse or the doctor anything? And because, yeah, that is a good thing. I mean, when I went to a stat C-section, yeah, it was definitely not a home away from home. But when they took my baby and hustled him off to the NICU, I was like, okay, he's going to the NICU and they will take very good care of him, because that's exactly what they do. This is their whole life. This is what they do. They know exactly what they're doing. I don't have to worry about him other than, is he going to be okay? But I knew he'd be taken care of. It was just, I can see why people get so wigged out when they are just having a normal labor and delivery, let alone having anything weird happen. It's just something that we do. I mean, some of us have done it a handful of times, but most of us, we've only, the first time we do it, it's completely new. Nobody really knows what it's like until it's them experience it. And to have someone sitting there next to you being able to tell you, okay, here we are, this is what we're doing, this is where we in our journey, this is the next step, that would be just a relief as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the emotional support's good, the water chips, the food, helping out the partner if they are not doing well themselves, that's great. But really, for me, what I think would be useful is someone just to check in on you and say, hey, how are we doing? What do you need right now? Because a lot of times that doesn't happen.
You hit the nail on the head, Danielle, when you said it would be nice for somebody to be able to help you with the paperwork. Just somebody who comes in and says, the nurse handed you this paperwork, you're sitting in triage, let me help you fill it all out, because you're sitting here and you are having contractions and they're not going to start any treatments until you get the paperwork filled out. So even if you want an epidural, you don't have one yet. So you've got to breathe through those contractions while you're reading contracts and stuff like that. And I can tell you that the reason I wound up with a home birth with my second child started with a paperwork issue with my first. I signed something that I didn't realize I was signing, which opened the door to interventions that I had very strong personal reasons not to want those interventions. And I had verbalized I would rather be wheeled back for a C-section right now than ever be put on Pitocin, because I have a long-standing family history of Pitocin not working on my family members. And whether it wasn't even just about the pain, it was when I was 19 years old, I sat in a room with my sister and I watched her on the highest dose of Pitocin that they could put her on, and she never dilated past 3 centimeters. And so I just don't want to go through it. If I have to have a C-section, I'm cooler with a C-section than Pitocin. Just take me back and cut me open. But it was a paperwork thing where I was too excited. And I was like, I remember sitting there and I was in triage, and every time I had a contraction, I would just look at my sister and I'd get this look on my face and we bust out laughing. And then the contraction would go away and I'd just sign, and then I'd flip the page. And I made the mistake of signing something that I did not want to sign. And that's where it started, where I was like, well, if I wasn't swept into the cascade of interventions and all of that stuff, So I think a doula can be extremely helpful if they are a doula who is integrated within the medical system, integrated within the hospitals, and has a positive working relationship with the nurses and doctors who are going to be charged with taking care of you. I keep saying to people, because it is devastating to me that the United States cannot provide a near guarantee of safety. Even our white moms are dying and having adverse outcomes in childbirth more than our other national counterparts in other parts of the world. So that devastates me. But the one thing that my experience with losing my son taught me is the medical system is just like any other system, and you cannot change a system from the outside. You change it from within. So if we want the medical system to change and we want it to work better for everyone who's going into it as a patient, it's going to be people who work in the medical system who help it change. So that's why I think the idea of having doulas, even like we were talking about in a private conversation about death doulas, where it's like, if I could get a job as a death doula with the experience that I have with my family members who've been on hospice, losing my son, the journey with grief that I've walked my whole life. If I could get a job like as a death doula who's paid by hospice, where it's not the family writing me a check, it is the organization that the family's working with who employs me, that would be amazing. And birth doulas who work in that realm, it would be amazing.